Grind is not a commercial style of music. We're not making money from it. So if there's anything, it's got to be enjoyable for us.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Edd Robinson. I play guitar and also do vocals in a band called Human Cull, and we're rather fast.
And you say rather fast. Do you want to assign a genre to that?
Yep, we're a grindcore band.
There's several flavors of grindcore. Would you say that you guys are more on the death metal side or maybe more on the crust side? Would you describe yourselves as old school or maybe technical or anything like that?
I would say we play pretty much like classic British style grind, which would be very much on the punk side of things. Not necessarily crust per se, but obviously that is a big influence on our music. Like I wouldn't say we're a crust grind band like some of the Swedish acts that you can think of are like Nasum to an extent would be, you know, a more metallic take on crust grind. But we're similar to that. But I think it has that traditional British feel, and it's sort of that style of grind where you can't really call it punk or metal. It just is grind. Like, you know, it's sort of like it takes elements of those genres and it kind of runs with them to the point that like they're no longer really recognizable to your average like extreme music fan, I'd say. You know, even people like death metal, black metal, etc., or hardcore and crust and stuff find grindcore generally to be a bit much. It's a genre with a very limited or select, depending how positive you want to be about it, appeal. That's being said, we are a death grind band, but very much coming from the grind side of things rather than the death metal side, like a band like, say, Exhumed or something like that.
So when you say that you started off as a death grind band, Do you want to tell people a little bit about how Human Cull came together and what the origins of the band were?
Yeah, we just sort of congealed, really. Basically, we sort of all met each other over the course of a year or so. We had a different bassist in the beginning, and he left after a couple of years. And our current bass player, Luke, joined us in 2013. And it's been the three of us ever since. Myself, Sam, who plays drums and also does a large part of the vocals. It's more or less a 50-50 split between he and I, and Luke, who just plays bass. So I say just, he plays bass, doesn't add vocals. And yeah, it really was just sort of like, we got on well enough and we enjoyed playing together, and we just sort of ended up doing it for, it's now been 12 years. There was no real plan for what kind of band we were going to do. It just happened to be what it was. And I think our collective sum of influences led to it being grindcore, because especially at the time, Sam and I were super into like old school grind and sort of like a bunch of other sort of noise style genres as well. And I've always really loved crust, and we all like death metal. Just kind of like a case of like, it just felt right to play that style of music. I don't know how conscious it was really looking back, because obviously 12 years ago, I'm a bit of a different person now than I was when I was 24. But I think that it felt natural to play in that style of play in that way. And like, yeah, we really love classic grindcore, and we like modern grind as well. We're not like, I don't think we're like necessarily elitist about things, but I mean, we are I am in as much as that, like, when I think of something as grindcore, I think of very specific things. And I did want Human Cull, once we'd sort of developed our sound, to conform to that in a certain way, but then also reach out in its own directions. What came more consciously was after we'd done our first album, Stillborn Nation, which is quite a crusty, straightforward, noisy grind record. I and the drummer, Sam, both basically wanted to move the band in a more technical and sort of like punishing direction, a much more kind of tight, almost clinical sort of sound. That was very conscious. And since then, we've kind of begun to bring in much more dissonant and clamorous and cacophonic elements to the music as well. Partly in a deliberate effort to kind of create our own distinct sound, but also just because that's what we enjoy playing, and it's just naturally how things come out. And it's just how I play guitar as well. Like, I'm quite an experimental guitar player, I suppose, in a sense. I like to kind of like play about with chord sequencing, throw in like weird, like out of place sounding like open notes beneath kind of power chord sequences, and just do things to add what I think adds character to the music. So yeah, it's a combination of basically just being drawn to playing in that way, and then kind of perhaps more of a post hoc analysis of what we're doing as we release each record and come to write again, and what we want to do with it. I also am really into writing catchy songs. Whether or not we succeed in that is probably down to the listener's opinion, but I always aim to like fill the song to hooks. I like a grind song to be a minute of basically just the best bits out of punk and metal it possibly can be.
So I definitely want to speak about your songwriting and your guitar playing style and how that affects the way you guys put songs together. But I want to backtrack for just 1 second. Human Cull grew out of a different project. Is that correct?
Yes, well, sort of. We Sam and I joined, myself as vocalist, Sam as guitar player, a band called Grindtember, which was a band that existed in Exeter. For anyone that's not really familiar with the kind of like the slang, gran is like British term for your grandmother. Grindtember, ha ha ha. So yeah, and like I never really liked the name that much, but it was more just like that it existed and it was something to join and something to do. And Sam and I basically set about basically dismantling that band and rebuilding it in our own image. We brought the original bass player with us. Initially, as we became Human Cull, Sam switched to drums because he wanted to play drums, and I wanted to play guitar. And yeah, and so he sort of basically taught himself drums as we were kind of wrapping up Grindtember, moving into Human Cull. And then yeah, basically it was just like a sort of semi-organic transition through members into it becoming the project that Sam and I really wanted it to be. And it took about a year, I'd say, to get there. We released one record called Human Cull. Obviously, we decided to proceed with that name. That's quite cool, actually. I like that record. It's like a kind of gory death grind album where I wrote like deliberately paranoid kind of lyrics for it. I was trying to go for something kind of weird and gonzo. And I think it turned out quite cool. It's rough and raw, obviously. It's death grind, but then it very much got its feet in grindcore rather than death metal again. And we had a different drummer who was actually a jazz player I met at university called John. And he brought a really interesting, like he couldn't play grindcore initially, but he taught himself to play it really fast. He was a fantastic drummer. And I think he brought an interesting energy to that record. We would have proceeded with him had he stayed, but he'd moved away. So Sam moved to drums and it became Human Cull.
Now, other than the change of name and the change in drummers, what would you say the biggest difference is between Grindtember and Human Cull?
songwriting's better. And the guitar playing is very different because it's me playing guitar rather than Sam. So I think that inevitably adds a slight. Obviously, in grindcore, you don't really think of it as necessarily melodic genre, but obviously guitar riffs have a melody to them, and everyone's ear is subtly different or really different. Everyone's different. You know, everyone hears music differently, and everyone sort of appreciates melody in a different way. And I think Sam and I both have quite different ears for what kind of constitutes like a hummable riff, should we say. So when he was writing, you would get different material to when I was writing. I think it's just a case of the difference is like a case of how you hear things and process things and write things, and obviously the inevitable change that comes when you switch members, but also like focus developing more and more, tightening our focus in as we played more and more, and what we enjoyed, what we liked playing, and what we thought was good. And I guess the philosophy behind the band became more sort of ardent as well. You know, Grand Toucher was more of a joke band, if anything, whereas Human Cull, like, I don't want to say it's like super serious, but I mean, like, it's not a joke band. It has a message of sorts, but I don't like to push that to the forefront. But that aspect of the band became more important.
You spoke about how you want your songs to have all the best bits of metal, punk, grind, death metal, etc. Is the riff the most important element for you?
No, the song is. The song, I start with a riff, but really, I mean, like, the song is the most important thing. The riffs have to be good because a song is formed of riffs. But a song that's just a bunch of good riffs isn't a good song necessarily. Some bands make that work, but I prefer to basically have a melodic through line, for most songs at least, where there's sort of like a sort of melody. I mean, it might be pushing it to call it that, but, you know, there's a kind of like, there's some sort of theme within like what's going on musically. And that also applies to the drums as well. I don't really write anything for drums at all. I really leave that to Sam to interpret things his own way. And the same for bass. Like, Luke will more or less follow what I'm doing, but he will add his own sort of touch to things. He might end up playing with the drums a bit more in some songs. And all of that contributes to songwriting. You know, there's like the technical side, and there's a sort of playing tight together. And then there's like the sort of like philosophy behind the song as well, if you want to call it that. For want of a better word, I think I'd call it a philosophy behind the song. I think grindcore, might be a way of putting it for grindcore. You know, there's all a kind of, there's a sort of like geist to the music that you can't necessarily say is like necessarily songwriting driven, but it's a vibe or something along those lines. But like I said, like, all of those constituent elements are equally as important, really, and they all form the most important thing, which is the song. That's got to be good.
And how do you prevent a song from just becoming a collection of riffs?
By trying to limit myself. If I'm the one that's writing the song, I'll try to limit myself to basically a rough structure, which will then get like inevitably changed and reworked and improved by the whole band when we come together to play something. But taking that, but also basically trying to limit myself to one or two riffs, and then basically developing sort of like different versions of those riffs, which can form like, you know, what could like charitably be referred to as a chorus or a verse. And then all the bridging parts are all kind of like variations on that, just kind of keeping that theme. But like I said, but also having that dynamic aspect as well, which comes more through tends to really be driven much more by the rhythm section. You know, letting that take over in certain places where it needs to, where you need to have those stop parts or like abrupt changes, or kind of like have the song kind of like maybe open up so it's less tense, that kind of stuff. And
how does the song usually start? Does it start with you writing riffs and then bringing it to the rest of the band?
One of two ways, really. Either I'll have like a rough idea of a song that I'll bring, or perhaps Luke and I, or Sam and I, all three of us will just start jamming on an idea in rehearsal, and it will just develop into a song. Those ones tend to take longer to write, I find, but they often are the best. You know, like they'll go through like many iterations. We'll generally settle on a rough idea of what the song should be. And then over the course of months, it will just get pulled to pieces and reassembled, you know. And sometimes certain songs you write, you realize that's actually two songs, you know, and you chop it in half and you take each piece and you then work that into a new song. So yeah, it's kind of like a combination of different ways of writing. Really, I wouldn't say we have any particular method. It's really just what seems to work at the time, and that can vary month by month. If you think you take a year or so to write an album, you know, it can be longer or shorter. Things inevitably change in the band dynamic in that time, and then they might revert again, and then they might go in a different direction. You know, it just depends who has ideas when. But I do tend to write constantly, and I'll always have an idea to bring to a band practice, whether it's a song or just a riff, or even just lyrics. I'm like, I've got these lines, play a drum beat, and then we'll see where we go from there. You know, that kind of thing. Is the collaborative element extremely important to you as far as songwriting goes? Well, I think it's necessary. It's very hard to write 20 to 25 songs by yourself. And it's also boring for the other members, I think, especially when you consider this is a project that we do for fun. Like growing is not a commercial style of music. We're not making money from it. So if there's anything, it's got to be enjoyable for us. So, I mean, for me, I really like to have the floor open for everyone to contribute ideas. I am the kind of person that has a tendency to take over. And I really fight that. I really try to fight that urge. And I think I get better as each year goes by. Yeah, it's important. It's an important part of being in a band and having fun with people as well.
So let's talk about the new album. Mm-hmm. Your third full length is called To Weep for Unconquered Worlds.
It is.
And it was released near the beginning of this year, 2022. When did you start working on this album?
Well, so Revenant was recorded in 2015. That's our previous album. Didn't come out till 2018 because DIY is slow. And we'd begun writing ideas in 2017.
Can you just expand on that idea for a second? Why is DIY slow?
Why is DIY? Because basically the way we tend to release things is we get a bunch of labels. I think Revenant had like 13 labels. I should have the record handy with me so I can reference it properly. But it had 13 labels, I think it was, involved in releasing it. And I can't name half of them. Just too much. But obviously it takes a while to get the money together, really. It's generally financial. And it can be organizational, but generally just getting the money together to put out, I think we pressed 900 copies of Revenant, so it wasn't cheap. So it just took a while in that regard. Pissed about with the mix on it. We had William Blackmon, the man who we recorded with. He's the drummer from Gadget. He has in I think it's sort of mid Sweden. We went out there in February to record Revenant. Beautiful, snowy. We recorded like an old church. It was incredible, and I mean you can tell it was a really good studio. It sounds really nice. We'll never sound that good again, but like it's just a long, slow process, and it took a while to come out, which can be frustrating, but you get used to it. And like I said, it's more about having fun doing things. So when it's out, it's cool. So yeah, and it just like I think we might have written this album faster, but it would have been very different had Revenant come out like within a year or two of its release, rather recording rather than 3 basically. But I think it benefited from that actually because we wrote a bunch of material in 2017. Most of it got pulled to pieces or scrapped, and then once Revenant came out, we kind of felt like the air had cleared, and we just became a lot more creative. And throughout 2019, we wrote the album. And a lot of that, like I said, a lot of the groundwork had been laid, and it was a case of fleshing things out, developing ideas, rewriting songs, maybe scrapping songs, until we felt we had enough material and we had like an album that flowed. We start thinking about the sequencing of the songs fairly early once it starts to come together. That's quite important. I think it's really important for grindcore. The album, if you want people to sit through 20 minutes of it, it needs to flow quite well. I think that's something a lot of bands tend to do wrong, actually, is have albums that are too long or just like kind of like the songs just to kind of bunch together in a weird way and you kind of find yourself skipping through it. I'm not saying that our album isn't like that, obviously. It's not for me to say. But one of my aims every time we do an album, particularly from Revenant onwards, has been to make sure that people can sit through it without feeling you need to skip. Because if it's only 20 minutes long and people are skipping through it, then that's kind of shit, really, isn't it?
It does flow quite well. It in that regard, it reminds me of World Downfall or the Repulsion album, just because it's an album that, for as many songs as it is, and fair enough, it's a short album, but it's an album that you can listen to from beginning to end without pause. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you.
So you spoke a little bit about how your guitar playing has changed or has affected the way you write songs. With regards to this album, how would you say To Weep for Unconquered Worlds is different from what you've done previously?
It's really different to our first full length and like the kind of splits and demos and EPs we did before doing Stillborn Nation, because like the band is different. We've got a different bass player and the songwriting dynamic is very different with Luke. He contributes a lot more, even if it's just feedback, but a lot of the time it is direct ideas. And that obviously,
when you say feedback, you mean noise, right? Not,
he might go, I don't like that, or like, that's too many slow parts, or we could do.
Oh, I see.
It could be, it could be anything, or it could be I really like that, it could be, or I think that I as times when I felt more confident playing guitar how I want to play guitar, really. In that, and I listened back to Stillborn Nation the other day actually, and I was like, quite a lot of things I wouldn't do like that now. For starters, I play well. But yeah, I mean, like to me now, it sounds like quite an embryonic album compared to like definitely Revenant, which I'm quite proud of. I'm very happy with how that album turned out. But like Revenant still has that kind of character to the guitar that our new one has. It's just that like my guitar playing's improved and my ability to kind of like translate ideas I have in my head has become like more sort of developed and just more confident, really. And I think that like also being less sort of concerned about playing classic grind, I think as well. I think I even was saying like when we were writing it, like I don't think I'm really going to write any grind riffs for this one, I did. But I imagine myself writing like sort of like micro prog metal parts for like the blasting sections, and that has actually sort of it kind of is that. I think like there is a lot of that in there, but yeah, obviously it's like put through like a dissonant filter and it's played so fast that you wouldn't listen to it and think it sounds like prog metal. Obviously it's grindcore, but that's the thing with grindcore, it's like it can absorb multiple genres and still remain what it is, because like I said at the start, it's been pushed to the very limits of what metal and punk can tolerate. So if you're playing in that sort of style, like an almost atavistic approach to music, really. Although I don't know if I'd call grindcore where it is now atavistic, because it's kind of become so sort of, it's been turned over so many times and iterated upon so many times that it may have lost some of that immediacy that I associate with the 80s style of grindcore, which is absolutely very atavistic form of music. Pushing music to the absolute limits. It's as extreme as it can be. Where do you go from here? You now sound like a band being pushed down the stairs. Like, what next? And there's something very feral and sort of primal about it as well. It comes through that, whether that sort of creates that sound or if it's a result of that sound. It depends on the band. But yeah, like just when you're operating within that framework, whatever you put into it You know, if you're playing with like a good rhythm section that kind of like well versed at playing super fast and staying just in control, but on the brink of chaos and making it feel like a train that's about to go off the tracks, but it's going to stay on the tracks. You know, it will stay. It's not coming off, but it's close. You know, when you take a fast turn, it maybe a couple of wheels kind of lift off, then they set themselves back down again. You know, like it's always going to be grindcore. I think really, like if you're playing that way. So it kind of so you have the sort of freedom to put whatever you want into it, really.
Would you say that you're more adventurous in terms of rhythms, the rhythms in your riff writing?
I mean, more adventurous than what? You mean just compared to what we used to do? If so, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Sort of putting those kind of weird groove parts in. You know, it sort of snaps kind of rigidly or fluidly, depending on the song, into something that kind of stomps or slithers. I've always liked a sort of slithery part, like, you know, I call them Kaiju riffs, where it kind of goes stomp, 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 and then you've got the slithering tail that follows behind it, you know. So I don't know, but we've always done that. I think it's just probably better executed. And I think the songwriting has improved each time we've iterated our sound and written a new record. So I think that like it's more those ideas are just expressed in a more like pertinent manner each time. And I think we've gotten quite good at dropping concisely into like a beat down and then exploding back out into a fast part without just sounding like fucking nails or some shit like that, you know.
How much of the sound and the way that the guitars and the rhythm section interplay with each other has to do with the fact that you're the sole guitarist, and so a lot of what drives the song is on your shoulders?
Well, I mean, obviously that's the thing with a power trio. And I think that it's like everyone contributes equally at a good power trio, like classic era Motorhead. That's what I always kind of like think of as like what I like a band to be. In a band that's a three-piece, I always compare to like that sort of 70s Motorhead, early 80s through the early 80s. That for me is kind of like the pinnacle of an effective sort of metal or punk band playing as a three-piece. And I think we all I don't think that I carry anything. I think that I actually let the rhythm section really carry things, and the guitar is like the melodic device on top. I know it sounds absurd, I keep saying this, to call it melodic, but I mean it is. It's just not like to a traditional melody. So I don't know. Because I'm also doing vocals, especially live. You know, we've seen rehearsals, but you have a lot more leeway. But when you're playing live, I keep it like as tight as I can, but it's loose where it can be. You know.
Where did you end up recording this?
We did this with our friend Dan Couch. He plays in a band alongside our drummer Sam called Helpless, who are really cool, kind of maybe sort of slightly prog tinged, but they're sort of like a metallic hardcore band, but they're coming from a very dissonant angle. It's much more dissonant than what Human Cull do. Not as fast either. It's like I said, more like metallic hardcore than grind, but they have an influence of that, obviously. But anyway, yeah, he works at a studio in Plymouth, and it's like a little community project. It's quite cool, really quite basic, but it's like got everything you need there. Sounds decent, and he knows his way around that studio really well. And it was easy to record in there because we've been friends with him for years. He's recorded us multiple times in the past, and you know, just trust him, and you can allow him to give sort of production input, like on guitar sound and things like that, and takes. What's a good take? What's a bad take? So he's a really good person to work with. You know, he does more than just push record. He has quite a lot of direct input. He's really good.
And he didn't just engineer the album; he mixed it and mastered it as well, right?
Did everything. Yeah, it was entirely his work.
In terms of feedback on production, what was the feedback that you gave him? How did you want this album to sound?
Crisp and clear, but still raw and punchy. I wanted it to sound throaty and aggressive, but I wanted it to be like clear so you could hear the riffs. I don't actually like it that much when bands have more complicated riffs. Obviously, if you're going for the jugular with real basic stuff, if it's just a blur, that's fine. When bands start to kind of incorporate more technical ideas into their music, the production doesn't really reflect that. I mean, you can still be really good, don't get me wrong. I like a lot of records that are muddy as fuck, but you know, and are burying actually some quite interesting ideas. But obviously, when you set out to record something and you're playing more intricate parts, you imagine people being able to hear what's going on. So that was from the guitar side of things. Well, you know, as rough and raw as possible while still maintaining clarity. Perhaps like almost like slightly glassy 80s thrash edge to it as well. Because I love the sound of those kind of records. Like Testament's first album would be a touch point for guitar sound for me. And also, obviously, things like Entombed, if you're going more death metal side. I can't say I was looking too much at grind. I mean, I suppose Terrorizer, World Downfall, but that's a death metal guitar sound anyway. Not Repulsion. Again, I wanted something with more clarity and perhaps more of a classic metal sound to it. Discordance Axis, but thicker as well. Yeah. And those would have been my sort of band type touch points for it.
Now, as you mentioned, you've worked with Dan since your first EP.
Yeah.
Why has this partnership lasted as long as it has?
He knows what he's doing. He has always given productive, interesting, intelligent feedback. He's got a good work ethic. I like the stuff I think what he's done for Human Cull has always sounded at least decent when we started out with him. And as he's grown as a producer and an engineer, and we've grown as a band, we've sort of grown together. And I think it's just been a really good working relationship. And the only thing we didn't record with Dan's involvement was, well, actually, that's not true. When we did Revenant, we did the instrumental part of the album with William Blackmore, but we actually did the vocals with Dan. So yeah, he has actually worked on everything. Just familiarity and the fact that he's good and that we get on with him really well. And he's a good lad.
Yeah, and he did a really good job on this album.
Yeah, it's just a winning combination of talent and likability.
So the album has been out since the beginning of the year, but I understand that there are some issues with vinyl and physical production and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, it's just there's a long waiting to. This album would have actually been out a lot quicker than our previous releases had we not been hit by like continuous delays at the pressing plant. Just the way things are now. Pressing plants can't keep up with demand and they're charging more and more. Bit of a problem. I'd almost be inclined not to bother pressing an album onto vinyl next time. Like, it's really nice to have the vinyl record, but it's also like so expensive, and they're just taking the piss, and I don't really want to give them my fucking money. Fuck them, you know. Like, it's just not good. The service isn't good in my opinion. I mean, different plants are probably different, but I was not impressed with the service with the one we work with. I'm not going to name who it is, but like, it's partly not their fault, I suppose, but like, they weren't helpful, I don't think. And like I said, this is going to be an ongoing problem now because records are popular again, which is good. It's nice to have it as a form. If you're not going to be buying CDs, it's nice to have like the record for your absolute favorite albums to have alongside your digital downloads or your Spotify. It's nice to have it, and it also helps support bands, and it provides like the art. I've always thought the art for an album is important as well, and obviously the vinyl record is the best way to appreciate the album as a sort of package with the art and the lyrics in front of you. But yeah, like I said, I think that it's actually agonizing trying to get albums pressed now, and I almost be inclined to just do CDs instead and see if people would buy them. I say that now. Obviously, years down the line, when I do my next release is being lined up, I'll be trying to get it pressed onto record. I am a hypocrite.
Well, speaking of the next release, it's been about a 3-year period between when you wrote Tweet for Unconquered Worlds to when it was finally released.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys started work on the next album?
No, we haven't started working on anything.
How come?
Well, I've moved to another part of the country and we hardly ever rehearse now, basically. And also the pandemic just put a big full stop on things anyway. It felt like pointless for me at least, it felt pointless trying to like do anything until things had settled down. So we'll see what the future holds. But so far, we haven't got anything planned at all. And
as far as the material that you guys scrapped going into this album, what happens to all that?
It wasn't good enough, and we wouldn't use it again. It's just ideas. It might have been a bit simplistic, or we're doing something that another song ended up doing better, and it was just redundant. And frankly, I can't even remember the songs that we scrapped now. So and I normally have quite a good memory for music. I'm not really someone that needs to record or write things down. If I've written something and it's good, I'll remember it forever. So I think that indicates to me that they simply weren't good enough. If they were, I'd remember how to play them.
With the growth that you guys have had for the last few releases, do you want to speculate on what the next Human Cull album might sound like?
If it were down to me, it would be prog metal with blasting. Frankly, I'm super into the idea of having complex, complex, intricate, melodically interesting. It's still clamorous and brutal riffs, and just relentless blasting over the top. Almost like war metal, but with melody. I can't imagine that would be the direction we'd go, though, because obviously we all contribute ideas. But that would be the kind of stuff I'd be bringing, I think. More stuff, maybe like the song Instinct Enthroned, where it sort of has that absolutely sort of punishing kind of riff section for the first part of the song. It breaks into a melodic death part, but Sam continues blasting over it. I thought that was really cool. It's one of my favorite moments on the album. More things like that. I've got that kind of super tense and then kind of opening up just a little bit. It's just letting a little bit of air in before kind of suffocating you again. That kind of stuff. Playing with tension a lot more. Keeping the song short. But like I said, yeah, bringing a lot more kind of 70s prog influenced ideas in there. But I mean, you wouldn't recognize in the 70s. I'd say this, but really once it's gone through that filter, it doesn't actually sound like that. Because I could point at multiple ideas on the Human Cull album, that was Genesis, that was Pink Floyd, but you wouldn't know unless I said that's what I had in mind when I wrote it, But
Now with 3 albums, a number of EPs, and you guys have been together for over a decade, is there anything else that you guys want to do that you haven't had a chance to do yet?
For me, not really. We've toured Europe multiple times. We've played OEF. We've played other UK festivals. We've toured the UK a whole lot. We've gigged all around. So, frankly, a lot of my sort of ambitions for what I wanted to do with music, as an amateur musician when I was in my early 20s before we started the band, have been fulfilled, really. And I'm happy with I'm happy with the last few releases we've done. I really, for me, it's just about improving songwriting every time. I would just want to write the best songs I possibly can. That's if I had any ambitions left, it would just be write better songs in terms of this specific project anyway. So
what you're saying is there are no more worlds left for you to conquer?
Well, obviously I'd like to tour again. The problem is obviously you kind of I'm getting a bit older now, and I'm not sure how much of my time I really want to spend in a van. As you get older, it does get a bit more you've done it multiple times, and it's how many times do you want to do this incredibly uncomfortable thing? Obviously, the playing side of it is great, but there's a lot of discomfort and boredom. And whilst you do get to see a lot of Europe and stuff, you also are only seeing very specific elements of each city you're in, unless you happen to have a day off or just a bit of extra time. But yeah, obviously, I'd like to do it again. I really enjoy touring. America would be cool, but I don't know at the moment how viable it is really with the way things are. It's so expensive. Petrol, just getting over there, visas, and just the fact that the air industry's fucked at the moment. It's still on its ass. Things get cancelled all the time. So for me, as a person who's quite anxious, who doesn't like planning things knowing there's a good chance they'll get cancelled, it really puts me off wanting to, basically just like throw my hat in for something that just causes me unnecessary stress. So until I feel confident, like we're not going to have like flights cancelled left, right, and centre, I wouldn't be interested in doing it anyway.
So To Weep for Unconquered Worlds is out now. Ed?
Yeah, isn't it?
How can people order the album?
You can get it from the main labels are 783, 738, 738 Punks. You can get it 783 Punks. Yep, you can get it from 7 Degrees Records, and the British label is Circus of the Macabre Records. I don't think we have there's a bunch of smaller labels as well who are distring it and have a number of copies themselves. And obviously you can get it directly from the band. Best, obviously, that's a good option if you're in the UK. Ourselves or Circus of the Macabre, humancull.bandcamp.com, the easiest place to order it, or the Circus Macabre webpage or their Bandcamp. And then if you're in Europe, obviously, you've got 7 Degrees. I'm sure I've been sending back to America. It's expensive for people to order it in America from us. There's probably a better option. I don't know what it is. I mean, feel free to order it from us, obviously. But yeah, postage is brutal at the moment, unfortunately, but that's just one of those things.
And if people want to follow Human Cull online, what's the best way to do that?
Facebook and Instagram. We don't actually have a dedicated website. It's rather remiss of us, but we don't.
Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I mean, cheers for having me on. We've had a lot of fun talking to you, talking about myself. But yeah, no, that's it, really. I don't have much else to add. I mean, listen to our new album if you like forward-thinking, aggressive grindcore. It's a bit of... we've tried to make it a journey. You should buy the record because you can read the lyrics along and be taken on the journey properly. It's not the same as listening to it on a streaming service. You should buy the album for the full experience.
Thanks so much, Ed.
But yeah, cheers. Thank you very much.